So Rembrandt's dedication to his intense religiosity can be seen in the three crosses. He really wanted to capture the moment described in the Gospels when during the crucifixion darkness covered the earth and Christ cried out to God and then dies. And so that's what the moment he was trying to capture here. What we see here are two stages in Rembrandt's creative process. He started with stage one over here, where he made a print, and then he progressed to stage four, and we made a print, another print of it. So the first stage, we have the centurions are kneeled in front of the cross while the terrified people react to the darkness. People reacting to Christ's death and darkness, we see like lots of different reactions to that. So you can see like over here, these guys are kind of ignoring it. These people are kind of passing out. And then in the fourth stage, we see that he's kind of completely reworked it. You really can't see a lot of the detail. So overall, this composition is much more compact. You really don't see the individualism that we see here. This is a lot clearer. The figures are separated. Here, everything is kind of, definitely that darkness has completely taken over and been intensified. This one seems a little bit more naturalistic. He's interested in people and figures. And here he's more interested in the essence of the moment, the drama, the power, the awe, the intense spirituality. So definitely a progression in styles there. Jan or Johannes Vermeer, from 1632 to 1675. He was an artist, innkeeper, and art dealer. He entered the Delft Artists Guild in 1653, and there he painted only for local patrons. He has a very meticulous technique. He painted landscapes, but seemed to he was particularly interested in scenes of women in their homes, either alone or with a servant, doing some cultured activity, like maybe writing, reading letters, or playing a musical instrument. His scenes convey this quiet interior, these low-key colors. Everything is very arranged, his composition, and in that I think he's influenced by Jan van Eyck kind of style. He adds clarity and balance to his compositions. His emotions are subdued, so really is contrasting to that Italian Baroque style. He deals with a lot of stillness, of meditation. Kind of going with that, he uses very controlled brushwork with tiny droplets of color to represent reflected light. This is his Woman Holding a Balance from about 1664. It is 16 inches by 14 inches, and it actually can be found in the National Gallery in DC. So again, if you get a chance to go see it, check it out. It is much different in person. This is a great example of genre painting. It's showing a daily activity. And it shows all of his characteristics. This interior scene, this quiet moment. A woman is watching her balance, and she's drawing the viewer's attention to the act of weighing and judging. From her eye line to the scales to the hand to the background, we see the image of the Last Judgment here in this painting. So definitely making a parallel between her kind of using the scale to weigh things and then the Last Judgment in the background. So his painting becomes a metaphor for the eternal judgment. This contrasts with the material objects of jewelry in the foreground here, depicting, or at least the middle ground anyway, depicting the transience of life and the brief quality of material things in earthly life. Paintings that have objects that symbolize the transience of life are called vanitas. And vanitas are popular, especially in Europe during the 17th century. They're usually found in still lifes or genre paintings. His use of tiny droplets of color to represent reflected light on beads can also be seen. You can see that like right through here. We saw genre painting beginning with Pietro Bruegel, and now Vermeer is continuing it in a more intimate setting. Now, the confusing thing is this is actually still considered Baroque. But how is it Baroque? It really seems to be so much different than what we saw with Caravaggio, what we saw with Bernini. But one, time period, and two, this use of tenebrism. We do see that contrast between these dark areas and then the light areas too. So we have this contrast between dark and light, this chiaroscuro, this tenebrism. So an interest in lighting effects. Also, it's interacting with the viewer a little bit. It's as if we are either looking into a window into the scene, or maybe we are standing right here watching her. So it's kind of like we are participating. And here's another example of one of his paintings. Such detail. Look at the map in the background. It's almost as if you could read it if you could just get close enough. Such great detail with this tapestry as well. The France Baroque period. Early 17th century France was marked by almost continuous foreign and civil wars. After Henry IV was assassinated in 1610, France was ruled by Marie de Medici, who we already met earlier when Peter Paul Rubens created some images of her. She ruled from 1610 to 1617. Then Louis XIV came of age, and he was advised by his chief minister. After Louis XIII's death, his 5-year-old son, Louis XIV, took over from 1643 to 1715. His mother, Anne of Austria, was regent with assistance of a powerful minister as well. In 1661, this cardinal, who was also the minister, died, and Louis began his own rule. Louis XIV became an absolute monarch, and he has the longest rule in European history. I mean, it began when he was 5, so it makes sense. He expanded royal art patronage. He made the French court the envy of every ruler in Europe. The arts and everything else were under royal control. In 1635, Cardinal Richelieu, who was the advisor to Louis XIII, he established the French Royal Academy. This academy makes a dictionary and establishes grammar standards for the French language. Then in 1648, the Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture was founded. When it's established, Louis XIV has complete control of the arts. Now, this is not the first Academy of Art in Europe, but this academy really becomes the authority for art throughout Europe, and its power will last until the late 19th century. Membership into this academy assures an artist of royal and civic commissions and financial success. Louis XIV reigned from 1661 to 1715, and he was known as the Sun King. He centralized the government around himself, and he used art and architecture as propaganda, and also, of course, to add to his own comfort and luxury. So this absolute monarch that I mentioned, what that means is that he rules by divine right. He has the power to rule designated from God. Now, if we go back to this painting of Louis XIV, it represents everything that Louis XIV saw himself as and hoped to promote himself as. Here he's represented as the Sun King. He's called the Sun King because he proclaimed that his leadership of France was akin to the sun's role in the universe. Quite simply, he thought himself as kind of the center of the world, and the world revolved around him. And he identified himself with Apollo. So this is a great example of official royal propaganda. He presents himself as idealized, but in a dramatic, powerful, extravagant style. He was concerned with capturing his majesty and authority of his role as absolute ruler of France. In 1668, Louis XIV began to enlarge a small chateau built by Louis XIII at Versailles, not far from Paris, and he moved his palace there in 1682. He moved his court there as well. The most important room for us is the interior, called the Hall of Mirrors. So here is the Hall of Mirrors. Previously, it had been a room that had an open gallery on the side. So what they did when they modified it is they enclosed it. They lined the interior walls with mirrors, and this actually made it seem like that they had more windows. Like, it made it seem like that it was a double windowed room, when really this is the interior and it's just mirrors, and then there's the exterior. The ceiling was decorated with paintings inspired by the Carracci's Farnese ceilings, and the scenes glorify the reign of Louis XIV and his military triumphs, assisted by classical gods. The underlying theme for this design and decoration of the whole palace was the glorification of the king as Apollo, the sun god. They use mediums here, which is of course characteristic of the Baroque period. Also that use of light, they're playing with light and mirrors. And the French are really taking the Baroque extravagance to the next level. That's going to lead into the Rococo period, which we'll talk about next time. Something kind of completely taking a turn from the image that we just looked at is Nicolas Poussin's landscape with St. John on Patmos. This In 1620s, the Mannerist style gave way to the Baroque classicism and Caravaggio style in France. They liked Caravaggio's tenebrism and his ranking light and placement of large-scale figures in the foreground. But later, under the control of Academy French painting, it's going to be more dominated by classical influences, and we can really see that here with Nicolas Poussin. He was born in Normandy, and he settled in Paris. He was not very popular there, so he left for Rome in 1624. There in Italy, he worked for French patrons. The Barberini family, in particular, were some of his best patrons. He was regarded by Bernini as one of the greatest painters in Rome. And he helped perfect the ideal classical landscape that would influence painters for the next 2 centuries. He was considered a classicist who organized natural elements and figures into idealized compositions. And he was influenced by the Carracci. You can definitely see that strong influence of the Renaissance and Carracci here in this image. But he did have his own personal style. He conveys a different mood than the Carracci and Italian Renaissance paintings. His landscapes focus on orderly, arranged classical landscapes. Here in this image, he's creating a consistent perspective progression from the picture plane back into the distance. We have a clearly defined foreground, a middle ground, and a background. And then St. John in the foreground is writing the book of Revelations, and he's surrounded by these huge ruins of ancient Rome. John writes about the end of the world, and the ruins are meant to reference that end of the world feeling. In the middle of the distance, we kind of have these more ruins, and we have an obelisk, which represents, of course, Rome and also refers to Egypt. We have a round building in the distance that represents Hadrian's tomb, distant city. He's very precisely placed trees. Everything is just very organized. His precisely placed trees, hills, mountains, waters, everything has their place. It's very organized, composed, and structured. The theme is also the triumph of the rational mind, and the purpose of the painting is not really the story of John the Evangelist, but rather the balance and order of nature. And so he's really going back to those classical Greek ideas. It's kind of going past the Renaissance and going further to recall those balance and order of the Greeks. Now, Poussin's paintings are extremely influential in French art. In the second half of the 17th century, the French Academy uses Poussin's notes and paintings as the final authority. So he's extremely influential on French art. You can read about Claude Lorraine in your book a little bit. He was also known as a classicist. Just wanted to show you an example of some of his artwork. I think this has a little bit more of a romantic flair than Poussin's did.